if we can continue, I was thinking that the tall buildings are something that he designed, but was only able to build a couple of them. It seems like it. However, his project for the mile-long tower, it certainly influenced some of the contemporary project. For example, the project that Daniel Libeskind had for the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center 1 tower, or as he used to call it, the Freedom Tower. It has a lot to do with this one. And then some others like the Burj Khalifa certainly has something to do. So he was quite a visionary that so many years ago he thought about it not just as structure but in atomic elevators, but also as a shape. So it's quite beautiful. Like 60 years ago, he was able to make this design. I'm intrigued by the project for St. Mark's Place. That, in fact, that was designed in the 20s, and it was way earlier than any of the Robert Moses projects for New York, so-called the projects, which are basically an exception of the New York grid that at that time was mainly done with tenement buildings, and so the traditional European block with open space patios and open space in the middle, and then houses in the perimeter. So Robert Moses' plan is essentially putting the buildings in the center, no patios, buildings in the center, square plan, and then separate from the perimeter. So Frank Lloyd Wright, 40 years before Moses, proposed a project like this. So I'm quite intrigued by this solution that he had for a tower which is freestanding, separate from the street level, independent, probably elevated above the ground, and cantilevering on the side. So where do you think this idea came from? And does it have something to do with his idea of the open spaces, Broadacre City, or any of that, or it has some other origin?
I think that's part of it. And the thing that because he didn't build the project, didn't
Maybe
get
we should go back to that slide.
Yeah. So here's one example where it was a complex, it was an open plaza. And then here is St. Mark's Towers. Now, what we don't have is exactly what would Wright have done on the ground level. And that's what counts. In other words, once you're up in your apartment, you hope it's a nice apartment. These are obviously going to have great views because, there's space around them, so you're not looking at a brick wall across the street. But what happens on the ground level? Once you don't have the New York street with the stores, you got to do something else, and it's got to work. And that's been a major failure of a lot of the projects in terms of thinking, so what is it? It's just a lot of keep off the grass signs, and a playground here and there. And then if, maybe a lot of parking lots. What makes a ground level human experience, human urban experience? And if Wright had actually built this, he would have made a statement about that. And hopefully it would have been a contribution. The fact that it didn't get built means he never worked out that level of detail. But that's really what you want to see. What happens where the building meets the ground? What is the urban pedestrian experience? And we don't have that with Wright. If we had, it probably would have been a contribution.
Well, it looks like from these images, his drawings, that it was supposed to be in the park. In fact, it's right beside the church. So this is the church, and this is open space, and you can see some trees around it, like here, and these trees over here. So it most probably would have had a park, or most probably it would have been some kind of private area that people access from the side, so they would have had.
But what would it have been
garden.
like? That's the trick. Same thing with the Mile High. What happens at the ground level? How does it relate to the rest of the city? And that's the test. And interestingly, see, people criticize the Guggenheim saying it's not a New York building. It is, because what you need in New York is you have to hold the street. You don't want a gaping hole in the street. And the Guggenheim puts a surface up there to hold the street. And you have to manage the corner because it's a block, and you have to create the corners, and he does that. Those are the two things you need to do to make a New York City urban building. Chicago, it's different, but that in New York, that's what constitutes a good New York building. And so that's the test. You can make drawings of a mile-high building or of a bunch of these buildings, but then how it actually meets the street is where you want to start to see, is this well worked out? And when we're critical of the projects, the housing projects of the 1940s and 50s, they didn't do that well. That becomes the criticism.
Well, they're kind of inspired very much by Vie Radieuse by Le Corbusier, where the building is lifted above ground so pedestrians can go underneath.
Right.
What they did in New York, instead of lifting the building above ground, they kind of closed it. So now they don't know what to do with these kind of ground level floors, where they had to put protection on the windows so people don't jump in and so on. So that has not been resolved well in New York. But I was wondering, would you call Frank Lloyd Wright a suburban architect? He has never, he has built the Guggenheim in New York, but most of his work is not in urban
Correct.
context. Most of it is somewhere in the suburban area.
Right. Well, that's true, and we can't criticize him for that. I'm sure he would have loved to have commissions in big cities. He didn't get them. So, we really, the kind of buildings architects build is usually not their choice. But yes, Wright didn't like the cities. He enjoyed coming to New York, staying at, fancy hotels, but he wasn't, he also couldn't wait to get home. And he lived in these rural compounds, Taliesin East and Taliesin West.
That makes a big difference.
Right.
Well, he has made a major contribution to New York with the Guggenheim, and a major contribution to American and world architecture. So we can only be thankful to you for sharing your knowledge and experience with his work. And I will look forward to your next lectures when we'll see the patterns, his importance for the 20th century, and his contribution to architecture in general.
Right. So we'll wrap up with patterns, and that is, a lot of these buildings look very different, but maybe not so much. Then we'll look at Wright's contributions to the 20th century, and then we'll explore a little bit more what Wright meant by organic architecture.
Thank you, John.